Okay, so we've looked at the different functional areas that exist within the organization, and we have some understanding now of the difference between the role that estates plays compared to IT support, which again is different than student services, different than HR, different than finance. But when combined together, these different functional areas make up the kind of day-to-day, short-term, long-term goals of the college. So what we need to know is consider one of those areas. Okay, we only need to look at one of them, but we do need to break it down into a little bit more detail and consider what are the inputs and the processing and the outputs that occur in this particular area. So there's an example of a diagram here from the Open University, which I think is probably going to be the easiest and simplest way of thinking about this task. So we can see across the top, we have the inputs, which then get processed, which then create outputs, and those outputs then obviously go off to whoever needs to see them. So if we think about, for example, human resources, and someone applies for a job, the input could be the application form for the job that's being advertised. The process then would obviously be taking the information from that form and putting it into the HR system, and then arranging for interviews and sending out times and those kinds of things. Output then may be some kind of letter to invite the person along for interview. It may be information sent from the system to the relevant members of staff that will be involved in the interview process. And, you know, it might be some information may be generated to, send off to, somebody who works maybe within safeguarding in HR, so they can think about the DBS checks and things like that that need to be done. So what we need to try and do is think of a list of all of the things that might come into the department, the processing that takes place to that data to, convert it into a useful output, and then what that output looks like. So, is it on screen? Is it just something that, we see on the screen that's useful to us in a database, for example? Or is it a graph? Is it a chart? Is it a ledger? Is it a list of ins and outs in terms of money coming in and out? Does that then become part of a fuller report or presentation, which is then delivered to somebody in higher management who has a more of an overview of financial things? So you can pick any one of those areas: finance, HR, estates, IT support, and then just think about all the inputs you can think about that have to come in, all the processing that gets done with those inputs, and what is produced that becomes an output on the back of it. Okay, so this just explains a little bit here about how these inputs, processes, and outputs might be managed. It's just a bit of an overview framework of operations management. It's just an example. And if you do obviously use any of the information in this slideshow, don't forget to source it, and the source is just here on the final slide.